And I want to play that exchange that you're referring to. This is part two that Seamus just referenced. When Tucker Carlson, some of these questions are good. Like it's crazy to say that, but it was a good get for him to get this interview, and he asked some relevant things. This is when Tucker asked the president of Iran, who came in as a reformer, but is now, as you say, getting hit for not being hawkish enough because 1,000 Iranians are dead from Israel and U.S. bombs. Asked here about Tucker Carlson about their openness to diplomacy.
Do you have plans to re-enter negotiations with the United States, with Envoy Steve Witkoff or anyone else? And if not, what do you think will happen?
We see no problem in re-entering the negotiations. But before that, I have to remind you that because of the atrocities by the Zionist regime, by Israel, not just against my country, but in the whole region, we are now facing a crisis. The people are facing a crisis that we need to put it behind ourselves. Our commanders were off duty. They were spending the night at their homes with their families, but they were killed. And this is considered a war crime according to the international law, because they were off duty, as I said. Or our scientists were also killed and assassinated along with their families and their wives and their children. They were also killed. Pregnant women, children, they were killed in the atrocities, in the attacks of the Israeli regime. Just because they wanted to kill one single person, they had to demolish and destroy a whole building. And as a result of this, a lot of innocent people were killed. A lot of people were killed. And as I said, there is this crisis that we have to put it behind ourselves. And there is a condition, there is a provision for the restarting the talks. How are we going to trust the United States again? We re-enter the negotiations. Then how can we know for sure that in the middle of the talks, the Israeli regime will not be given the permission again to attack us?
That is an excellent question, but you're, Seamus, across some of the Iranian domestic reaction to this. Can you both expand on his comments and how they're being perceived internally in Iran, which you touched on earlier, but just if you could expand on it?
I mean, when Pezeshkian was running for president, there was a big criticism from the conservative camp who were backing Saeed Jalili, who was a nuclear negotiator who was once criticized as a failure, but now has a much warmer reputation after the myriad betrayals by the American negotiating team. The criticism was that continuing to emphasize the importance of negotiations, that engaging with the West was placing Iran in a weak position, that it was pursuing a failed strategy, and that this would eventually come to bite the country in the back in the future. And now, I mean, the response that I've seen from the conservative media has broadly been, I mean, why are we still doing this? Why is the foreign minister still talking about potentially going back to the negotiating table? Why is the president talking about potentially negotiating with the Americans? I mean, that phrase about like putting this crisis behind us, it's like we haven't gotten. They're critical of why. I mean, one thing I should say is that when the ceasefire was declared, very suddenly, in the middle of the night, there was this lack of belief that this was possible. The tone in the conservative media on state television in Iran was that discussing a ceasefire when Israel was attacking so severely, so violently, would be treasonous, that Iran had the upper hand, that it needed to follow the the Houthi model of striking 10 times harder than the Americans were striking. All of the mood was that it needed to expand. Like, we're in the existential war right now that has always been promised, and we need to act like it. And then when that ceasefire suddenly happens, everybody's just kind of bewildered and is wondering, where do we go from here? Where does this whole go?
Especially because the reports are, we don't get accurate information about casualties out of Israel. We just don't, because they always are trying to project strength. But from what we've heard, the Iranian strikes, it punctured the Iron Dome, right? And Israel was in a weak position. So there's speculation that the ceasefire that was so rushed was like Trump pushing it over the ceasefire, I'm putting in quotes, pushed over the finish line here because Israel was suffering losses. And so if you're a hawk within Iran, and I know we talk about Iran here domestically as if they don't have their own conservatives and liberals and hawks and doves and like their own political system. But if you're a hawk in Iran, you're going to say, why did we stop here? And what did we even gain out of this?
Yeah, and I mean, the thing you're talking about with Israel taking losses, there were people talking about that if this were to go further, if this were to go into another week or two, another few weeks, that Israel would have seen much more devastating effects from the fact that they were running out of interceptor missiles. Now, America can supply those, and that's still a major concern, but they were reaching that bottleneck. And now that there is a ceasefire, I mean, I follow reformist figures, I follow reformist journalists inside Iran, and even though they're obviously happy that they're not getting bombed every single day by the Israeli Air Force, we've seen what happens with ceasefires in Gaza and in Lebanon. Even during those periods of relative peace, I mean, there were still daily strikes. There's still daily strikes in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon. Israeli troops kept moving in southern Lebanon just yesterday. And now Israel is talking about striking Iran again to keep it in compliance with the ceasefire if it moves to reconstruct the nuclear program. So the concern that was raised at that time was like, okay, we've lost the ladder of escalation here, and now we're forced back into a reactive position. I mean, this has been a really devastating war. I mean, hundreds of people have died, nearly 1,000 people have died, but this situation might be worse after this. It might be a situation that we can't easily get ourselves out of, and that's a real concern.
The incentive is for Iran to make a nuclear weapon. That's what they're basically. I think that Israel and the United States would be okay with that outcome if it is pursued. But if it's achieved, then there's a level of deterrence that Iran didn't previously possess. And that's probably what the hardliners are saying, right? Like, what can we do to prevent ourselves from being bombed when the U.S. is not engaging in negotiations in good faith, and maybe even was engaging in negotiations with us as some sort of stalling tactic to put their defenses down so that Israel could bomb? The internal conversations with Iran should be like, well, what other deterrent do we have except for creating our own nuclear weapon?
I mean, when the war was happening, there were members of parliament who were on television practically begging the supreme leader to construct a nuclear weapon, to remove his fatwa against nuclear weapons. There were protests in the streets, demonstrations, people were chanting for an atomic bomb. There is a real sense of like, in the public discourse in a way that it really wasn't beforehand, even if it had been trending that way, but it suddenly just explodes onto the scene. If we're being accused of constantly having a nuclear weapon, if we're doing all these symbolic retaliations, why on earth don't we have this? The primary roadblock to that, though, is that, okay, you have the state television, you have the media, you have members of parliament, but then you have the military leadership and then the supreme leader. And those individuals are not publicly saying that they want a nuclear weapon. They're even warning against this, calls for this in the media. Mohsen Rezai, a major general, IRGC major general, went on TV and said there were no plans to change that doctrine. The president, Pezeshkian, also said that there would be no chance that they're going to make a nuclear weapon. That as long as the supreme leader Khamenei is still alive, and that could be, years and years, if there is no Israeli assassination strike, which they have threatened. I mean, then that could continue to be the case. They're insisting on this sort of moral stand against being as bad as their enemies, like Iraq under Saddam Hussein, like America. And in the end, I mean, what's the effect of that? They have no deterrence, like you're talking about.
Right, especially when the details of the JCPOA were so favorable to the United States. Under 4% enrichment. I mean, this is clearly civilian usage. And now there's this, not just a level of mistrust that has been, deep mistrust that has been exacerbated by the events of the past 10 years since Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal that was working. It also, oh shoot, I lost my train of thought a little bit. But it shows a level of mistrust on that front. But it also, here's what I meant to say. It fractures the relationship between the IAEA and the International Atomic Energy. I'm forgetting the exact acronym, but the inspectors who were looking to see if Iran was abiding by the agreement laid out in the JCPOA, and they were. But now I'm seeing that there are claims from the Iranian government that they believe that the IAEA was spying on behalf of Israel. And so what this has also done is it's fractured the relationship between the inspectors and the United States as well, and Iran as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was a vote in Parliament that was virtually unanimous to stop cooperating with the IAEA. Yeah. And now I think that only goes through the Supreme National Security Council. They have to get some sort of authorization through there. But that's right. I mean, that transparency is gone. It benefited Iran almost nothing. And now it is much harder to verify what Iran is actually doing with its nuclear program, attempting to get any sort of international guarantee to that effect. And I mean, it just also works to confirm that Europe, despite at one time portraying itself as a much more reasonable negotiating partner, is now much more in line with the United States. I mean, during the war, the new German Chancellor Merz was talking about Israel doing its dirty work, Europe's dirty work in regards to the war. And when Iran made a whole big show about going to negotiate with Europe, showing it as like, okay, we can't negotiate with America, but we can negotiate with the EU, then the French representative goes on television and says, actually, no, we agree that there should be no nuclear enrichment. Their goals are exactly the same as the United States. And I'm sure if the subject becomes about getting rid of its ballistic missile capabilities or getting rid of any other thing that Iran has, Europe will be exactly in line with this. It forces Iran into, whether or not it wants it to, it is becoming more and more isolated as other countries reveal what their actual intentions are. And Iranian diplomats were very bewildered to this fact during the negotiating process before the war, and they seem to be getting it more after the war, but to the degree that it may actually change their calculus, I'm not sure.
Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.